Mahatma Gandhi who says, gentleness, self-sacrifice, and generosity are the exclusive possessions of no race or religion. But the nemesis to generosity is greed and selfishness. Greed is a terrible thing to be reigning in our lives. Greed stifles growth, cripples progress, and handicaps upward mobility. Greed is too heavy of a burden to bear for us to carry. However, selfishness is another thing that is terribly bad. Selfishness chokes out our ability to embrace the diversity of others. It causes the helium of pride to blow up our heads. Being selfish speaks of our immaturity more than anything, because none of us have gotten as far as we've gotten only on ourselves. None of us is an island that says that we've got here by ourselves, we've done it all by ourselves, and we didn't have anybody else's help. No one else was generous to us, but I do know somebody who was generous to you just this morning. It was God who woke you up this morning. We can't live only receiving. Living like that is called hoarding. Life is not about ourselves only. It is how we give and the motivation behind our giving and what matters most to God. God blesses us better than we deserve. That was a good place to say amen. We are the recipients of gifts that are worth more than we could ever repay. We all live in the exchanges that are so enormous that we can't even fathom. Paul, in his concluding letter to the epistles to the Philippian church, has laid the groundwork for joy that he has for their faith. Paul has poured his heart out while in prison. He demonstrates that no matter what his situation is, his mind is made up. I believe that Paul's conviction is contagious. Do you agree? Do you not agree that Paul has lifted our spirit over the last 10 or 11 sermons? Has he come to the point that he now knows that affirmation of his kindness towards him is such a blessing that Paul is concluding his letter by helping them to understand, I really appreciate what you've done for me. Paul thanks them for their generosity, which was delivered to them by their dear brother Epaphroditus. Epaphroditus, whose name means loving or charming, was a fellow worker in Paul's missionary work. While traveling to share their gifts with Paul, he fell sick enough to the point of death, but God's grace had prevailed. He is in connection, or he is the connection point between Paul and the Philippian church. He is on Paul's team. He's helping Paul in ministry. He helps the gospel reach others through Paul's preaching and Paul's teaching. He does this by being unselfish and not greedy. See, Epaphroditus could be untrustworthy and keep some of the monetary gifts from the Philippians for himself. Yet his heart is for the good and the work that Paul is doing on behalf of the gospel of Jesus Christ. Make sure, my brothers and sisters, that if you have people on your team, make sure they got the right heart for your life. Epaphroditus gives accountability for the work that he does by verifying what they gave. He brings the full gift to Paul to help him do his work while Paul is in prison. Paul is working for God while in prison. I want to say that one more time because you need to see that. Paul is in a bad situation, but he's still working for God because he got in that situation while working for God. Paul is locked up behind prison walls, locked up behind bars, but he's still preaching and he's still teaching regardless of the situation that he's in. Paul is in the pen, but he uses his pen and parchment to set other people free. I'm trying to tell somebody it doesn't matter where you are, you still can be working for the Lord. Yet Paul needs aid to relieve him of the stresses that his work brings to his life. See, ministry is costly. We can't pay for the hours of preparation. We can't calculate the weight of the work. See, ministry to people is heart work, emotional work, mind work, and even some physical work. See, ministry goes on while you sleep. Ministry is happening somewhere, everywhere. Ministry is about meeting people's needs of the hurt that are in their lives. But the Philippian church, which were small cell churches, gave collectively to the work that God had assigned to Paul's life. They took a vested interest in Paul's living and well-being. The Philippian church gave to the point that Paul uses the words in verse 18 to describe his appreciation for their generosity towards him. He uses words like sweet smell, words like acceptable sacrifice, or a sacrifice that is acceptable. And then he uses words like well-pleasing to God. Do your giving of your life and your talents, does it smell sweet to God? Is it a sacrifice that God says is acceptable? And is what you're doing so good that it well pleases God? They gave out of their own need to demonstrate how much they wanted to help Paul spread the gospel of Jesus Christ. They gave to the point that their generosity carried an aroma that changed the atmosphere of where he was located. They gave to the point that their sacrifice met God's approval. And they gave to the point that their generosity was well-pleasing to God. They gave while not missing a beat in their own lives. And therefore, Paul challenged us today to examine our own generosity. Paul forces us to look deep inside of who we are and ask 3 hard questions. Is my generosity to the point that it smells good in the nostrils of God? Is the sacrifice I'm making acceptable in God's eyes? And is my offering, my life and my time, well-pleasing unto God? However, if you have not reached this point and level in your life of generosity, there is good news. God has given us a blueprint from the Philippian church to help us get to the point that our generosity can get to the next level. God uses Paul's ministry to bless us to understand there is reciprocity in our generosity. Paul helps us in verse number 19, because their gifts and sacrifices and generosity please God. Paul responds with this declaration: since you met and exceeded my needs and desires to the point that I abound and I am full, my God shall supply all your needs according to his riches in his glory. Or by his glory in or by Christ Jesus. So here is the probing question for all of us this morning. What can we learn from this text that helps us to better understand the reciprocity of God in our lives? I have a few things I want to suggest, and I promise you to get out of your way. The first thing I want to suggest is God's reciprocity is activated by the motives of our generosity. Our hearts must be right when we give. It's a good time to be quiet because it's called self-examination. How you give is not what you give, but how you give it. You do know that you can give $1 million with a bad heart, and that is not pleasing to God. And you can give $1 and with a good heart, and God is more excited about the dollar you gave because God knows from which the heart it came from. You can give your time and be complaining and whining and fussing, or you can give your time unto God and be pleased with the fact that you've done it with the kind of heart that you want to serve other people because your needs have already been met through your service. God is concerned about our hearts because our hearts can be deceptive and wicked at the same time. You can give your service but not have the right heart in what you're doing. My father used to always say this. We had to wash the dishes, and he'd always say, if I catch one spoon or one fork or plate with anything left on it, you're going to have to wash all the dishes in the kitchen. All of them. What y'all call that now is punishment. What my father called it was putting your heart into it. Because let me tell you why. I work in the food industry, and when food is not properly removed from plates, it can carry disease and bacteria. So when mama would always help us to understand that depending upon what she cooked, it needed a little bleach in the water. When she cooked spaghetti, it's a little greasy, and sometimes you have to put a little bleach in the water with the joy. The joy had that lemon sit to help cut the grease, but the bleach was making sure that the grease completely was removed from the pot. Daddy said, when you care about what you're doing, you put your heart into it, because what you're doing is going to affect somebody else's life. I wish I had somebody who heard me here. And so even to this day, some 50 years later, I've been washing dishes since I was about 7.5, 8 years old. 50 years later, I live by myself. I only have one set of forks, spoons, knives, and tablespoons and teaspoons. I still got the same remedy for myself. When I wash my own dishes, I still rub them to make sure I got all of the debris of the past off of them, because I don't want to pass on the germs that was in that pot or in that sink on to myself. Let me try to help somebody. Everything that you do, God is determining that you do it from your heart, because what you do from your heart is going to impact somebody else's life. And you and I have to learn that everything we do has consequences to bless or to blemish somebody else. And when you do what you need to do from your heart, nobody has to tell you what to do. When you care, you look for stuff to fix. When you care, you do the best that you can. When you care from your heart, nobody has to make you give to your church or help somebody who's less fortunate than you are. When you care, you do it because you care. And when you care from your heart. Don't tell me you love me and you don't do anything for me from your heart. It's a sad commentary that people can live together in the same house for years and never really feel the love, even though we say the love. When my kids were little, I waited till they got a little bit older, and I said, now you never have to worry about whether or not your mother or I love you. They would say, Daddy, why are you talking about? I say, listen, because it takes love to get up in the middle of the night to change your diaper. A mother loves the child because she won't let her baby stay dirty all night long. She'll get up in the middle of the night and she'll get up and change the baby's diaper, have sleep. She has it down to a science. She ain't gonna miss nothing. The baby wipe, everything, and will go into the kitchen, warm up the bottle, put the baby, give it back to the baby, and put the baby back to sleep so she can catch up on her nap, because she know the baby gonna be hungry a little bit later. That's love. Love will do what is sometimes inconvenient, because love is doing it from the heart. God's generosity is moved because we do things with the right heart. But secondly, God's generosity is motivated by the velocity of our generosity. Our hands have to allow what God has given us to release it to somebody else. When you give, don't hold back. Let me help somebody. I know that we say tithes and offering. I'm not really talking about tithes and offering, even though I could be talking about tithes and offering. Here it is. Here it is. You have more to give than just your money. You have your time and your talent. What we have to realize is that if we release our time to God and release our talent to God, it will be no problem with releasing our treasure, because the more time we spend to God, the less we are concerned about stuff in the first place. When we hold on to stuff too long, it gathers some dust. Brother Bethea, I am a dust phobe. Y'all know that already. You know that. I've been here long enough to know. You know, pastor can see dust even when you're not looking for dust. I'm looking for dust. Because as a kid, I was allergic to dirt. Right? Skin couldn't get dirty, so I couldn't hardly go outside and play with everybody else. Couldn't run through all of the fields and have fun with all my friends without having to get some, back then it was called Physoderm soap. Anybody remember Physoderm soap? It was for people whose skin was allergic to certain kind of allergies. Some 50 years later, I still have some of that issue. I can get a little dirty, but I got to hurry and wash my hands because they'll start itching. What I learned was that God will allow you to live in such a way that what you have to release.